Forum's 5th Annual Leadership Summit, celebrating 75 years of partnership. Please welcome John Chambers, Dr. Mukesh Aghi, Chip Kaye, Sumant Sinha, and Nick Dugan for the USISPF Industry Awards ceremony. Over to you, Mr. Chambers.
Well, please call me John so I won't feel old or formal. It's a pleasure to do this, and I didn't realize how important it was, Mukesh, to do this each year till I watch the effect that we have. It's great to have a vision of a strategic partnership between India and the U.S., and it's great to be able to talk about our accomplishments, but it doesn't happen without leaders going the extra effort to really make such a huge difference. And often people say, why don't they get involved? And it's often because they do not see the role models. They don't see the ability to really make a difference, and they aren't able to share the successes. And so when we recognize these top public sector and private sector leaders each year, it means an awful lot to all of us. And today is an example of two great leaders in Chip and Sumant who have made a difference. They are also both on our board, and we've watched the difference they've made consistently over the last decade and 2 decades in the India-U.S. strategic partnership. Chip Kaye, the CEO of Warburg Pincus, and Sumant Sinha, the founder, chairman, and chairman Renew Power, are both board members, as I said, of USISPF from before, but they have given tirelessly of their time to really make a difference, both for their companies, but more important, giving back to really make a difference in this partnership. Chip, I'm going to lead with you first, and you've led Warburg Pincus for 2 decades, I think, and you really set the pace with private equity being involved in India at a time that people were hesitant and said, can it really make a difference? And then you started it with the Bharti Airtel, but then you just kept building on it, and it allowed us to attract a large number of funds and a lot of private equity interest to India, which is so important to the capital formation. So I want to thank you and congratulate you on the award today. Sumant, you've been the leader in new and renewable energy, which I think we realize now more than ever how important this is to the future of our planet and how important it is for the U.S. and India together to lead in these type of capabilities and with tremendous innovation. You were one of the first big plays in the India renewables, and you've educated the world in terms of India's energy future during the last decade, leading your organization from founder to just a world-class company. So I want to, again, congratulate both of you. There could not be better role models. And I'm going to ask each of you to make a couple minutes of comments and a little bit about the award, but also don't hesitate to share what you found in the partnership and why you spend the time giving back like you do. Chip, I'm going to ask you to go first, if that would be all right.
Thank you, John, and thanks for the kind words, and thanks to all of you for the opportunity to join you. As John mentioned, I've been at Warburg Pincus for 36 years, and the real turning point in my life, and professionally and frankly personally, was moving to Asia in 1994 and being part of creating our firm's businesses across the region. 28 years ago, I fell in love with India, and it's become a important part of our firm. And the award I'm delighted to accept on behalf of all of them in the context of the franchise we've built there. And we think in our unique way, been a part of sort of fostering U.S.-India relationship through the commercial ties and the businesses we play in, but also through the outside activities that many of us pursue. I had the great privilege of chairing the predecessor organization, U.S.-India Business Council, and during the course of the Indian civil nuclear deal, and came to appreciate how valuable and important this relationship is, and only more so in the more fragile geopolitics of the world today. This has always been an organization I've had great pride in and been part of, and I'm delighted to accept this award on behalf of all of my partners and colleagues at Warburg Pincus.
Chip, congratulations. We're also proud of what you've been able to do, and a great role model. And I like the way you said you fell in love with India. I think that's what we've all learned how to do over the years. Sumant, can I move to you for your comments, sir?
Yeah, sure, John. Thank you so much. And I'd really like to thank USISPF for this recognition. I guess it's not just for me, but for all the contribution of my fellow more than 2,000 colleagues in my company. I joined USISPF several years ago, and it seemed to me very, the right thing to do, given the fact that the US is the second largest market in the world for renewable energy, and India is the third largest. And there is a lot of scope for cooperation between the two countries. The US has technology, it has academic institutions that are phenomenal. It also has obviously capital, and it has some really excellent talent to work with. India, on the other hand, obviously is a big market, and huge opportunities to grow in the country. So to me, this is a natural partnership, of course, expressed in my sector in renewable energy, but also much more broadly as well. So I'm really excited to be part of USISPF. I'm really excited to be getting this award. I think there's a tremendous amount that we can do working together. And I was recently at the Sydney Energy Forum hosted by the Australian Prime Minister, at which the four Quad energy ministers were there as well. And the scope for cooperation between our countries, given the massive energy transition that is happening around us, is really immense. And we took actually a significant step forward when our company got listed on the Nasdaq last year. So in some senses, we are in fact the epitome of cooperation between the two countries. And our largest shareholder, in fact, has been one of Chip's colleagues from the private equity industry, Goldman Sachs, who have been really good partners for us over the last 10, 11 years, and really helped us get started. So in that sense, we are really an outcome of the cooperation between the two countries, and hopefully the best, if I can say it myself, that the two countries can come together and achieve and deliver. But thank you again so much for this terrific award and this terrific recognition. Thanks.
Congratulations and well done. You make us very proud, and you allow other people who are watching today to realize they can make a difference being part of this partnership in a unique way, not just for the economic success of their organization, but also in giving back. Let's move it on now to the moderated section.
Thank you, John, and welcome everyone who's tuning in. My name is Nikhil Diogan. I'm the CEO of the Americas of the Brunswick Group. I've had the pleasure of knowing Chip and Sumant. Chip I've known for a long time, and Chip and Sumant, congratulations on this tremendous award. And I just want to say a couple of words about USISPF. It was the first board I joined when I left journalism, and thanks to prodding by Chip, so I feel it's full circle. And this is my third year, I believe, moderating these sessions. And what we really see in these sessions, and I hope you get to see, is just the tremendous spirit of the partnership and the real work that has been done by Mukesh, Gaurav, and the USISPF team, because every year just gets better and better, and you start to see really the fruits of what has been built. And Sumant, I think you said it perfectly when you said, what Renew has done is really the epitome of this partnership, and to see it grow. As somebody who grew up in India and moved here when I was 18 years old, it's really tremendous to see what you have accomplished as an example of what can be done when our two countries really get together. Chip, I'm going to start with you because I've known you the longest, and I knew Chip as a journalist, and he's become a friend and a colleague now. And having watched him, the thing that struck me about Chip 20 plus years ago is still what strikes me today. And I say this to people: he is as the non-Indian, he knows more about what's happening in India than I do, which I always appreciate. But Chip, I would love to start with just a sense of when you first fell in love with India, as you so well put it. What was it that drew you there from a business perspective? What was the opportunity you saw, and how has that evolved over time?
Sure. Thanks, Nick, and thanks for the kind words. We go back a long way, and it's great to be together for this. As I referenced, I first went to India in 1994 when our firm started to establish its business in Asia, and I think the core in India to me was a combination of this deep swell of entrepreneurs who, in my view, had survived in some ways what was the most difficult and inhospitable business climate one could imagine. And these were kind of the true Darwinian survivors of high real rates, which made financial assets cheap, and which made capital scarce. And if you were prepared to sort of bring a view that understood how that broad macro environment might change and recognize the opportunity that existed to go buy assets at what felt like attractive prices, but even more importantly, provide capital to that generation of entrepreneurs that you saw rising, that was really what the seeds were for our franchise there. And it showed up both in our relationships with existing businesses where we could buy portions of them and grow with them. And most importantly, it showed up in our ability to sort of from whole cloth be part of creating some really remarkable businesses there. And that insight of the recognizing the talent that existed within the Indian entrepreneur community and what could happen if freed a bit from sort of the difficulty policy regime that had sort of existed before, I'd say was the real kernel to our success there.
And so you must have seen, Chip, obviously a lot of difficulty too. And you were very early. I mean, now we all talk about these things as a given. What are some, you entered very famously in the telecom sector. You've now obviously expanded into a number of other areas. You have, investments, not just in India, but all over the world. What are the areas that look attractive now? And I want you to also hit the point about the entrepreneurs, I think is so important.
Yeah, look, I think, the thing that's probably changed the most was, and it was sort of the start of when we got there was, the availability of capital was really, was difficult. I mean, it was either wealthy families, established business groups, but the idea of sort of capital that fed another generation of entrepreneurs was what new. And that's probably been the thing that's changed the most over the last 28 years. And now you've sort of unleashed that sort of same entrepreneurial dream that we've seen in other parts of the world. When I look at India today, I was actually just there last month, and it's probably the longest period of time I hadn't been able to get back there. It's it's got one of the better hands of cards that exist in the more complicated world that we live in today. As is often talked about, it has probably the strongest demographic profile of any large country in the world that unleashes a whole suite of sort of domestic demand opportunities across the kind of consumer digital worlds, if you will, access to healthcare, the financial services space that has been a constant theme of us to invest. And at the same time, there's always been the opportunity to kind of leverage the cost and skill advantages that India has globally. So, we're all going to live through a more difficult period of time over the next year or two. But I think, India managed through the pandemic in a way that I think was better than most of us would have thought. And it's come out with an optimism about it that's a little bit differentiated in the world today. And it's going to continue to be exciting to see it develop.
So I like Chip. I was in India just a couple of months ago, and Mukesh and the USISPF team very graciously hosted a lunch for me. And what I was saying, I ran into Sumant in the lobby of the Oberoi, and what really struck me then is just the nature of Indian business today and how the needs have evolved. And Sumant, I think what you have done and how you spotted that opportunity in energy is a truly inspiring story. But it's when success happens, people think it happens overnight, but obviously it took a long road, and it's a real credit to you. Tell us a little bit about what you saw initially as the opportunity and how that's evolved, because you're now listed on the NASDAQ. You're quoted as blazing a trail for Wall Street for Indian unicorns, but I know there was a lot of hard work that went into it.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. Yeah, look, in all of these things, one looks at the end product, but as you rightly said, there's a ton of effort that goes into it. And I would also add a little bit of luck, if not a lot of luck that goes into it. As an entrepreneur, when you start on something, it's very hard to really see where you might take the business to. And so in the beginning, it's really just one step at a time. The reason that I got into this business is because 15 years ago, when I was looking at this sector, it appeared to me even back then that climate change would become a fairly significant issue and a pretty fairly big problem for all of us in the future. And obviously, that early in the game, I didn't really realize what might happen over a period of time, how things might evolve. but it just seemed to me to be the right decision at that point in time. I could sense that this would become a bigger problem and that it would require bigger solutions as well. Now, it's very hard to anticipate when you're starting how things might evolve for you specifically, and also how the sector might evolve. And especially in a sector like ours, where technology has been evolving so rapidly as well, and where policy making and therefore the policy environment that that governments come up with is also so critical to drive businesses forward. And so the reason that I said that we were lucky is because when we started off, we were fortunate that we got Goldman to commit a fairly large amount of capital to us right in the beginning. So that got us started. And then, of course, our business is at heart an infrastructure business, which means that we have to go to very rural India, back of beyond areas, construct large, roads out there, go through small little villages, acquire land, try to be a good neighbor and a good, community member to a lot of the folks that live there, and really take these mammoth wind turbines or mammoth solar panels into these areas and put them up. And that's not an easy thing to do in the context of a country like India, where everything is very, very complicated. And so in the beginning, really, in the first few years, it was all about just proving the fact that we could get all of this done. But then I think that a turning point happened in 2014 when this current government came in and really resized the targets for renewable energy. And I must say that our Prime Minister Modi, was a very sort of intuitive and gut supporter of renewable energy. And so right from the beginning, he came in and he set these very massive targets. And that then got the entire policy establishment in India to rally behind that and come up with policies that were actually encouraging the further rollout of renewables. And that really helped us grow, really enlarge the market, and really helped us grow within that quite substantially. And then, of course, 3 years ago, renewables became much cheaper than conventional power. And so that then became the next source of growth for our sector. And so all of those things coming together, something that we really couldn't have anticipated, at least when I started the company 11 years ago, but in some ways all came together fairly well from our standpoint, and really allowed us to be successful over this period of time. And now where we've got to is that we generate about 1% of India's electricity and help mitigate about 0.5% of carbon emissions of the country over the last year. So I think we're beginning to have an impact, and that's really good.
Sumant, you made some news in the last year also by, it's a very capital intensive business, as you pointed out, but you've kind of doubled down on moving production into India from China and other locations. Tell us a little bit about your thinking about that and how you came to that conclusion.
Yeah, that's a great question, Nick. And something that most people don't realize when they talk about the clean energy transition is the fact that China has cornered the entire supply chain for solar modules, the entire back-end part of the value chain, for rare earths, for refined capacities, for batteries, for electric vehicles increasingly as well. And so really we are at a point now where the world's entire clean energy transition in some ways depends on China. And within China also what's been happening is that the supply chain is getting more and more consolidated, and it's really putting power in the hands of a few companies there. Now, as recent events have shown us in Europe particularly, dependence on any one country for anything is not a great idea. And neither is it in this case for the world's climate change efforts. And so the Indian government took a geopolitical decision saying that they wanted to actually indigenize production of solar modules. And I think that's a great thing, because India is one of the few countries that has a market big enough that we can actually set up domestic capacity and then eventually become a sourcing hub for the rest of the world. It'll take time, but it's certainly something that the government is keen on doing. And companies like us are obviously, clearly, sort of going along with that, because I think it makes eminent sense. And I think a few years down the road, hopefully, we become one of the biggest exporters from here to the US, for example, which may or may not go down the same path of setting up domestic capacities.
So that's a great segue, Chip, to something you mentioned in right before we started the call, which is, the lifetime we've lived in the last 25 years or so in business. We haven't seen two big things. One is kind of conflict of great powers, and now the geopolitical issues that Sumant referred to are so front and center, as well as inflation often caused by energy prices. Talk to us a little bit about how you think about that as you think about investing around the world, because I think that's something this audience would love to hear from you, Chip.
Well, I mean, first, just to say congratulations to Sumant. I thought his comments around it were quite interesting. And one of India's Achilles heels has always been energy, and it's remarkable to see the country and him addressing it. I think, as I was saying before we started, there's lots of noise in the world, and obviously we talk about war in Ukraine and supply chain and political polarization and income inequality. I think we're going to experience a difficult next year or two. And I think for another, frankly, for a generation of investors whose careers are, less than almost 15 years, the only mistake people felt like they ever made is what they didn't do. And that environment's going to change. I think, the other side actually, I think, feels okay. But the two core things to me that I think really none of us have experienced during our careers are inflation, which we've all lived in, especially the investing community has lived in an environment really going back to the early 1980s, 40 years of this sort of secular decline in inflation and rates, which underpinned asset prices and sort of provided a very powerful tailwind. And at the same time, have lived without great power conflict. At a minimum back to the early 1990s, but one could argue even before that, in that the Soviet Union really wasn't a part of the global economy in that sense. And now it's not just the implications of the war in Ukraine and what it means for Europe, but I think perhaps the single biggest issue of the world is having the two largest economies in it, representing 40% of global GDP that are at odds. And geopolitics to me was always, it was interesting. But it was on the margins. And I think now it's in a much more front and center way. You heard Sumant talk about it, and each in very different ways. I think India will be an interesting part of that conversation, especially around the geopolitics, given sort of its unique place and status in the world in some ways. So, I think it's a more difficult environment that we're entering into, and a fair bit of uncertainty that we're all going to experience over this. And but I think India's got a bit of a unique place to deal in some of this, especially around sort of the geopolitics questions.
Well, and given how closely geopolitics is tied to energy, Sumant, I think this idea of India being not just an exporter but an innovator as it comes to the transition around energy is going to be pretty critical, because I think what I noticed certainly when I was there a couple of months ago, Indians are very focused on the cost, and a lot of other countries are still thinking about it on a theoretical level. What's your outlook for that, and how do you see what areas of the renewable industry do you feel you have the most confidence in, and what are some of the areas the India-American partnership going to help accelerate those?
Yeah, I think energy is at a very interesting crossroads right now. We were already in the midst of a couple of different transitions happening, one towards electrification, the other towards decarbonization of electricity. And throw on top of that this whole geopolitical war situation, which is now spreading inflation everywhere and really hastening and disrupting some of these transitions. That's really complicating matters very substantially for a lot of companies and also countries, because suddenly everybody is facing the burden of higher energy prices, and that's leading different countries to react differently. For example, the European countries will have to make do without any energy supplies coming in from Russia. So how will they deal with that? They'll have to buy more coal, for example. They may have to set up more, buy gas from elsewhere. And that in turn will raise prices for everybody, everywhere else in the world, because suddenly coal for India will become more expensive. And so India is going to have to deal with inflation on the energy side as well. So I think, look, the difficulty is that, or the problem is that we might end up making decisions that eventually, harm the whole battle against climate change by taking decisions that are good for the short run in terms of having more coal or having more fossil fuel. But in the long run, obviously, those are damaging to the global economy and to climate change. And so, how do we find solutions that are really based around clean energy? And I think that there are no real good solutions to that. I think the world is looking at a point of point of the next 2-3 years where things are going to be difficult, where energy prices are going to feed into inflation even more as we go forward. What can India and the US do? Look, I think, as I said, first of all, we need to ensure that we have manufacturing capabilities outside of China to reduce dependence on China. I think that's one clear thing that needs to be done. We need to set up more polysilicon capacities all the way to modules. The second thing is, the cost of capital going up across the board for everybody is obviously not great. Energy is a capital intensive area, and so we need to find a way to bring the cost of capital to come down. Now, whether it happens when recession happens in the US and that brings down interest rates, I don't know, but that's something that certainly needs to happen. I think we can do with more technology partnerships as well, and I think the US has, as I was saying earlier, a lot of good technology which we need to bring to market much faster, and we need to get it to scale in the Indian context as well. And I would say, lastly, we need to ensure that things like green hydrogen, batteries, new technologies, these are things that can be implemented at scale, and both governments have to drive it really rapidly. I think those are the kinds of things that can be done.
Well, look, as somebody who ran a television network, I believe in keeping time, but I want to end with two very quick answers from both of you. And I'm reminded that I always say that John Chambers is the most optimistic and uplifting business leader I've come across. So I'm going to ask both Sumant and Chip one last question, which is, what's the area of thing you're most optimistic about right now? And Sumant, I'll start with you and I'll end with Chip.
The thing that I'm most optimistic about, that's a tough one in this current environment. Look, I'm really optimistic about the long-term growth of India, because I think, as Chip said earlier, the demographics are very solidly in support. We've got a great, I think, a very supportive government as well in place right now. And I think all the factors are sort of in place. And I think we should be looking at many years of structurally high growth rates going forward. So I think that's something that does give me optimism.
Chip, I'll give you the last word.
I think it's always pithy and easy, especially on TV, as you know, to sort of always, be a bit the dour naysayer and the like. But, I think the key to life is being optimistic and recognizing that the thing you can be most positive about is always the future, because it's unknown and unwritten, and you get a chance to change it. So, and places like India, when I look back over the nearly 3 decades I've been traveling there, remind you of that there are places in the world where history hasn't been written yet, and you get a chance to kind of change what the arc of the narrative looks like.
Well, that's a great uplifting message to end. I think it even meets the John Chambers standard. So congratulations to Chip and Sumant again on such a terrific award, and thanks to all of you for tuning in. Back to you, Mukesh.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chip. Thank you, Sumant.